Some more reading here of Lorenzo Dow Watson's second wife, Emily Crane. So, this is some more. In 1871, at the age of 15, Emily became assistant school teacher to a Mr. Damron. She was leader in the dramatics club, organized earlier by her father, and became first president of the Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Association in Kenosha. She continued her school teaching, was considered the life of all the parties, and became engaged to George Penny. Her father did not approve of George as he was not religious. This disturbed Emily, as she did not want to displease her father. She had now become a member of Bishop Colbert King's family. They treated her as a daughter. George had pursued Emily to be married. Persuaded Emily to be married on Christmas Day. In November, Patriarch J.L. Smith stopped overnight at the King home en route to St. George. He said to Emily, "I am leaving in the morning and should love to give you a blessing before I go." Emily said this filled her cup of happiness to overflowing. In his blessing, Patriarch Smith promised Emily that she should marry a man strong in the faith and advised her not to be hasty in her decision. She also said that she should go through the house of the Lord with her companion. At this, Emily had a talk with George Penny and asked him to postpone the wedding until she was more sure of herself. It was at this time that the United Order was established, and everyone in Kenosha was anxious to try it. Emily could not reconcile her British mind to this law of collectivism, and so she was one of the few in Kenosha who refused to accept it. This bears out one of the fundamental elements of Emily's character. She never compromised with what she thought was right. She stood by her principles regardless of the suffering it brought her. The King household now moved to Kingston, Sevier County, to live by the new order. They regretted leaving Emily behind, but she could not be persuaded to join them. Just at this time, word came that all teachers must take a state examination. Mr. Dameron went to Fillmore to take the examination, but he failed in spelling. He sent Emily up to take it, hoping that one of them could pass so keep the school. Emily passed with honors, and the school continued. The Kings hated so to leave Emily alone that they asked their relatives in Fillmore, parents of Senator Will King and attorney Sam King, and the Collisters to help Emily get a position of teaching in Fillmore. This they did, and Emily went to Fillmore to spend one of the happiest periods of her life. She taught under Alma Greenwood, and at the close of the school year, an article appeared in the Deseret News telling of her success. Deseret News, June 11, 1977, Fillmore, Utah. Miss Emily Crane, a very estimable young lady, was taught 2 quarters in this place, and it is sufficient to say Miss Emily Crane, a very estimable young lady, has taught 2 quarters in this place, and it is sufficient to say that she is unexcelled in the primary department. Signed E.X. Admiration. The Deseret News, Wednesday, June 11th. Fillmore, May 31st, 1879. The second term of our school ended yesterday with a public examination in the State House. The manner in which the teachers, Mr. A. Greenwood, Mrs. D. Olson, and Miss E. Crane, handled their subjects and conducted their classes showed that they understood their business. The exercise in primary geography by Miss Crane drew the admiration of all present. The drawing, locating, and answering questions would have been creditable to older pupils. And the lady is deserving of high commendation for the pains she has taken, more especially as she was without the use of wall maps. During this term, 212 pupils have been enrolled. 47 have discontinued, leaving 165 at the close. The results of this quarter have in every particular given general satisfaction to all concerned. During the day, remarks were made by President Hinckley, Partridge, B. Robison of the Board of Trustees, and A. Greenwood. And that's the end of the Deseret News quotes. Emily boarded with the Hinckley family. Mr. Hinckley was president of the stake and had 2 wives. He asked Emily to become his 3rd wife. Just at this time, Lorenzo Dow Watson brought his wife, Melissa Clark, to visit her people, the Callisters. He proposed plural marriage to Emily. As it all seemed to fulfill the promise of Emily's blessing, she consented. From June until Christmas, she prepared for her marriage. She was 26 years of age and had taught school since she was 16. They received their recommends to be married in the St. George Temple. Watson and Lissy had not been married in the temple. Therefore, he took Lissy and their 5 children with Emily to St. George in a covered wagon for the purpose of marrying both wives in the temple and having the children sealed. Most of the food for the journey was cooked and prepared by Lissy before leaving Parowan. 2 items I well remember were a large boiled ham and several loaves of salt rising bread filled with raisins. The only accommodations obtainable for 8 people was a lumber shack without furniture. We camped in this the first night. The trip to St. George and return was a bitter cold one. Deep snow lay on the ground. It had taken 3 days to reach St. George, and it took 3 days to return. It was Christmas time, and the children couldn't understand a Christmas without Santa. Watson and Lissy's marriage was solemnized in the in the St. George Temple, December 24th, 1879, and their 5 children were sealed to them. December 26th of 1879, Watson and Emily were married for time and eternity. Plural marriage was not an easy adjustment for Lissy, especially since she had had her husband to herself for nearly 7 years. But she accepted it as a part of the pattern of the gospel she loved, and she lived it to the best of her ability. She was not naturally a jealous or demanding woman, and she managed to accept the change in her married life with as little friction as possible. Emily was taken to live with Lissy and family for a short time. Emily was a well-educated person and had been in public work all her young life until now, so she had to learn the art of cooking here. Then Watson rented a small house of Robert Quorum, who kept the only telegraph office in town. This building was located directly north of the old Rock Meeting House. Here, Emily lived until April 22nd of 1882. At this time, Watson purchased a 2-room concrete house and lot off Joseph Bentley for the sum of $400. Here he built a small kitchen. The house faced the east, and the same canyon breeze blew down to it. This lot joined the south side of Lissy's lot and contained 1 1/20 acres, as did that of Lissy. In this house, 8 of Emily's 9 children were born. The oldest child, a girl named Tallulah Lagoyes, was born in the Quorum house. Emily and Watson's children were in order of birth: Tallulah Lagoyes, Ora Laverne, Lorenzo Dow Jr., Ralph Crane, Iva, Alice Nevada, Lunita, and Florian and Afton. I think I showed this picture when I started, I don't know, probably maybe not, when I started her talking about Emily Crane. Lorenzo's strong in girls. He has a lot of daughters that lived and are strong. Okay, I'm keep on going. There's a little more of Emily Crane. If polygamy was lived as it should be, it was lived so in these 2 homes. Watson handled both families with equity, fairness, and with firmness. Each wife deeply loved her husband and possessed constancy to her affections and principles. To his families, his word was law, because he was a marvelously fair man, wise beyond his years. His children were taught, when asked if the other wife's children were half-brothers or half-sisters, to answer, "They look whole to me." So the children grew up with love and affection for each other. Children were welcomed in these Mormon families. Each time a child came to bless the Watson home, the father would say they were a special blessing from God, and that with each added responsibility, his capacity for taking care of them increased, not only financially, but in his ability to provide the better values of life. Each wife had her own home deeded to her, and each home was comfortably furnished. The 2 wives were direct opposites in some respects. One had a natural gift above the average for composing and arranging her thoughts with the medium of writing. The other, schooled from infancy in domestic arts, her mother was a professional tailor, was acquainted with all the culinary arts that pioneer life had forced upon her. Emily's greatest gift was being able to put her thoughts in writing. She wrote an eulogy of Alice Hobbs Banks, a neighbor who lived by the Watsons for many years. Emily's Emily's pen picture was so beautifully written that you could see Alice's large smiling face as she entered your home to offer assistance in time of need. She made everyone feel the warmth and comfort of a true Christian. This article was published in the Iron County News. Would that this letter had the copy I cut out. Would that this writer had the copy I cut out and saved for years. On the other hand, if you had offended Emily, her note would fairly burn you, and you would be apt to exclaim like the Dutchman who had been quarrelled with his neighbor, I wouldn't feel so bad, but he called me but I was. For many years, Emily wrote articles for the Woman's Exponent. This journal was the forerunner for the Relief Society magazine. Emily's home was as artistically decorated as was Lissy's. Emily had taught oil paintings and especially oils on velvet. She had a beautiful lambrequin on her mantle of salmon velvet with large chrysanthemums designed and painted, her own work. When we talked of a fireplace, Ora said, I can prove she had a fireplace. One day, as we were romping around the room, I threw my leg out too far and hit the grate. She carries a heavy scar halfway up her leg. Emily had what they then called a crazy jar. Today, 1969, we make them and just call them decorated jars. This of Emily's was a fruit jar with many lovely things glued to it and painted on it. Father made the furniture for this home, as he had done for the other. One bedroom set was bird's eye maple, and as Ora remembers it, nothing today is more beautiful. The posts were hand-turned and the wood beautifully furnished. There was a small front room table. And now it's turning to another heading, planning for foods for the families. Anyway, so that's the end of Emily Crane, and the thing about that is that you will find out later that so we realize here that Emily was she had not so much of the pioneer upbringing, and she had, when she got married, she had lots of children fast, and two of them, it looks like, died young, and I'm trying to remember, but that all was kind of taking a toll on her. And the thing that I wanted to really especially talk about Emily and how what her character was, is because by the time my grandmother, Lissy's daughter, Pearl, was old enough to like be a little babysitter, she'd go over every day to Emily's house and be mother, like a mother's little helper. So I think it was about 8 years old. And then she'd go home at nights, but pretty soon she started just staying at Emily, at Emily's home, being the big helper. And so I feel like probably she got a lot of characteristics, or learning, she learned and grew in the home under Emily a lot. And so we'll hear more about that. But that's pretty sweet that it worked out like that. If you, I don't know, it's different for everyone, but if I think about it too long, and as I'm reading parts of this plural marriage stuff, it just seems wrong. Just like, what were anyone thinking? But I'm glad that it worked for them, and I can see how there would be some benefits and happy benefits. Yeah. So that's all I can think to say about that, and it also tells me a lot about Lorenzo Dow and him being able to take care of his responsibilities and teach and learn how to get along. Okay, so then I will read more later on this. Things are going well. Thank you. Bye.